Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. This is a show that unpacks the stories shaping our world in ways most people never see coming. I am so pleased to be here with my colleague and co host, Dr. Sean Deneen.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. It's always a joy to explore things with you, whether it's something serious like this or a fun thing like bizarre laws. We have a way of really learning things, and it's a pleasure to learn with and from a brilliant man like yourself.
Okay, yes. So,
Today, we're talking about a transformation that's shaking global politics. The decline and collapse of trust by treasured allies in the United States as a reliable international partner.
once upon a time, America's word anchored the global order. When a U.S. president committed to a treaty or promised allies protection, the world believed it. That trust is unraveling very fast.
Let's start with the obvious. The United States has withdrawn from or defunded dozens of international organizations, including the World Health Organization, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, UNESCO, and the Population Fund, also a UN program. These groups were once pillars of global cooperation on health, science, and the environment.
Yes. And some of them have had very long tendrils of effect, like the World Health Organization or WHO. Since we have withdrawn from that and no longer participate, we are not privy to the latest data collected around the world on any number of health treatments and other procedures. And it is affecting us. It's also cut us off from some medications and other things. People don't know about this, but professionals in the field do. These withdrawals did not happen in a vacuum. They were framed as, quote, sovereignty moves. But the reality is that they left the US without a seat at the tables that set global standards. It's not just climate policy or infectious disease response, it is influence.
Meanwhile, President Trump's second term embrace of what analysts call hard unilateralism has created exactly the kind of instability allies once counted on the United States to prevent. According to Lodi 411's March 2026 report, America is now engaged, officially or unofficially, without UN backing or largely without allied coalitions, in 6 coercive and military operations simultaneously: Iran, Venezuela, Mexico, Greenland, Cuba, and policies that effectively undercut Ukraine's defense effort.
Yes, and we do have a reference on that. It's lodi411.com, and you can check it out. You did hear all that right, too, by the way. The US is coercing or outright attacking several countries at once and even threatening allies. That's unprecedented since before the Second World War.
Let's talk about the most well known operations in Greenland and Canada because those episodes hit our credibility especially hard.
This started with President Trump's rhetoric around buying Greenland from Denmark, which escalated into talk of taking it if Denmark refused. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, he told European delegates that you can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or say no, and we will remember. That line chilled every U.S. ally in the room.
And it wasn't just talk. Intelligence leaks showed economic pressure, covert influence operations in Greenland, support for separatists over there, both with propaganda and funding, tariffs against Danish and European imports as punishment for resistance. Denmark's Defense Intelligence Service now lists the U.S. as a potential security risk, a staggering break inside NATO.
Yeah. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, delivered one of the most defiant speeches ever by a G7 leader, comparing US dominance to the fall of the Soviet Union. And I would say it was a very apt comparison. Carney told the Davos audience the era of American hegemony was ending and declared that Canada would deepen ties with China instead.
That is breathtaking. A NATO ally publicly saying China is now a more reliable partner, one of the last communist countries in the world, than the United States. And this from the country we've considered our closest ally that shares our longest border. It is a sign of how far American unpredictability has eroded trust.
Yeah, Fareed Zakaria wrote that America's strength rested on legitimacy, the idea that US power was exercised through rules and consent, not coercion. That's what made alliances possible. But the 2026 invasion of Venezuela flipped that on its head.
The U.S. operation captured President Nicolas Maduro, killed dozens of Cuban military advisors, and flew Maduro to New York for trial. President Trump explicitly said American companies would, quote, run Venezuela's oil and oil industry afterward. That is pure 19th century resource colonialism.
And it didn't stop there. Cuba was hit with secondary sanctions just for selling oil, and Mexico has been targeted by drone strikes on cartel territories without consent from its government. Combined, these moves have rewritten international norms. The message is this: America acts where it wants, when it wants, how it wants, law or ally be damned.
That message is why allies are hedging. Middle powers like Canada, Germany, Qatar, and even India are expanding trade ties with China to diversify away from reliance on the U.S. As Mark Carney put it, the world isn't splitting into pro or anti American camps. It's splitting into countries that can tolerate American instability and those that cannot. The source of that quote is cyrusjansen.substack.com.
And then came Operation Midnight Hammer. The Iran strikes in coordination with Israel, which killed Iran's supreme leader and senior commanders. The problem isn't only the violence, but the unilateralism. No UN authorization, no congressional approval, and minimal, at best, allied support.
That deepened global perceptions of the United States as a rogue actor. Most European nations called it reckless. Much of Asia condemned it as destabilizing. Oil markets spiked, and the International Atomic Energy Agency lost access to key Iranian sites. See Lodi411.com for more information on that.
It's ironic. By claiming to deter war, this approach may be setting the stage for a wider one. And the more America acts alone, the more others collaborate without us.
Let's pivot now to Ukraine because the U.S. position there says a lot about global trust as well. After years of bipartisan support, the Trump administration's new national security strategy has stopped labeling Russia as an adversary. Negotiations have leaned toward recognizing Russian territorial gains.
that just blows my mind, Dr. Deneen. It does. That effectively signals to Europe that Washington has given up defending Ukraine and, by extension, NATO's eastern flank. European leaders now fear that the next Russian move could go unopposed. Analysts at Lodi 411 describe U.S. behavior as legitimizing aggression. Well, and why wouldn't we? We've been the aggressor in a lot of things, huh?
And this brings us to the question we're hearing everywhere. Is Trump acting in alignment with Putin's strategic goals, whether intentionally or otherwise?
That's a very loaded question. And yes, we have to act carefully because if we don't, who knows, the black sedans may come pulling up in front of my place here and I could disappear. But when you look at the outcomes, undermining NATO, weakening Ukraine, fracturing Western unity, it's indisputable that Vladimir Putin benefits.
Fareed Zakaria warned nearly 20 years ago that great powers collapse not when they grow weak, but when they destroy the structures and systems that made them strong. What we are seeing now is a return to post World War I isolationism, and that looks like an America voluntarily unraveling its own foundations.
Yeah. Now, whether Trump is a puppet or simply following instincts that mirror Putin's worldview, authoritarian, winner take all politics, the result is similar. It teaches the world to fear the US, not to trust it.
And fear, as diplomatic historian Robert Kagan, the author of the seminal work Rise and Fall of Great Powers, is not the same as leadership. Fear makes allies hedge, democracies drift away, and rivals step in to fill the power vacuum.
That is for sure. So here's the striking irony. Today, at the World Economic Forum, it's often China's representatives who talk about stability, predictability, and the importance of multilateral rules. And those speeches are greeted with applause. Of
Let's not be entirely naive, Dr. Weaver. I'm sure that Beijing has its own interests at heart.
course.
Its message, whether sincere or self serving, sounds calm compared to Washington's chaos. The trust that once defined U.S. global leadership has leaded. In many capitals, policymakers now describe China as more consistent, if not necessarily more democratic. That is a profound change.
And it kind of breaks my heart too. It really
Mine too.
does. America was once the keeper of the global rule book. Now it's playing by no rules at all. And when that happens, others will write new ones. Be sure of that.
Authoritarian rivals haven't overpowered America. We've alienated our friends, and in the long term, ladies and gentlemen, that may prove more dangerous than any missile or treaty.
The challenge now is existential. Can the U.S. restore trust before the world permanently moves on? And this is all the more devastating when you look at approval ratings, and still, he goes on unchecked. Dr. Deneen, I know that we have our differences on politics, and that's great. I love it because we can talk openly, easily, and come out with friendly things. I respect you so much.
And you. I mean, our discussions are intense, but it is conducted in an atmosphere of scholarship and mutual respect.
And friendship,
Absolutely.
you know? And when you have like 31% of the US population agreeing with these things, and yet he goes on unleashed. He just does whatever he wants. and nobody is acting to say, wait, 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 this is not the will of the people. I mean, I know that we're not a democracy, that doesn't exist, but we are a republic, a democratic republic. I'm not talking about the party democratic, but we're drifting. We're drifting. And that scares the hell out of me.
It does me also. I'm also, perhaps it is, I can hardly say youthful, but middle aged naivete. I believe that a country that has survived two world wars and 250 years of both great achievement, great mistakes, and great crisis can survive this one. Only God and history know in the end.
Well, that's true. That's true. Well, listen, I want to thank our listeners for joining us today and listening in. We've got some really hot topics coming your way. And I want to encourage you to give a like, of course, and, comment. If you disagree, that's fine. We welcome disagreement. If you do agree, that's even better, perhaps. But comment, subscribe, doesn't cost you a thing. And we're going to have some special goodies coming up for our subscribers too soon.
We absolutely are. And may I just say, folks, very briefly, I looked, we have 281 episodes now. I can't hardly believe it. And it's because of you, Dr. Weaver, and the other people that have been involved, and all of you listeners out there, that's possible.
Absolutely. And we'll soon be expanding to other platforms in addition to YouTube. So come on back, join us. Until then, for Dr. Deneen and me, I say bye for now.